Absolutely. I'm Nate Morehouse. I'm the director for the Institute for Research in Sensing, which goes by the acronym IRiS. It's an interdisciplinary research institute launched last fall, so we've been around for about a year at the University of Cincinnati. And the mission is really to connect a very long time strength in sensing and perception and sensor technology development, which has had its home in science and technology and engineering at the university, with perspectives from the humanities, the fine and performing arts, and the social sciences, to pursue new answers and more robust or holistic answers to many of our society's challenges. This Alloy series is an extension of that mission. It's really meant to bring people together from really different perspectives to talk about common topics or shared questions or areas of curiosity. This is our 7th one. We had 6 last year. That was our first season. They're pop-up events. We won't come back here. They're always in a different location around town. We've done them at the Lunken Airport Terminal, at the Swing House, at the American Sign Museum, at the Cincinnati Observatory. Upcoming ones will be at Drip Coffee and Camp Washington, at the Mercantile Library, at Clovernook Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I was just speaking with somebody about that. World's largest producer of Braille is in College Hill. Wow. So we'll be able to get to see the Braille presses. It's really cool spaces. So anyway, there's so much to discover about Cincinnati, and part of the point of this is to help people to fall in love with the city that maybe they grew up in or maybe they've been transplanted to. That's what happened to me, and I'm a grow where you're planted kind of person, so I love discovering new places that surprise me here. And so that's part of the purpose of the Alloy series. A quick thing about format. So we've invited 6 people to join us tonight to start the conversation. This is not meant to be a panel. You've noticed that we haven't sat them up on a stage here where you can listen to their brilliance. They are brilliant, by the way, but the point is to set it up so that you all feel comfortable participating. And when these work well, the audience talks about as much of the time as the people we've invited. So please chime in, raise your hand, offer questions or comments or thoughts. We've asked the people that we've invited not to show up representing their place of employment or their field of study, but rather as people. What are things that you have experienced or that you believe or that you've come to understand? And we want you as the audience to do the same thing. So this is meant to kind of wander. We're not going to arrive anywhere, folks. This is always irritating for some members of the audience, but it's meant to send you off on a journey of thinking and being curious, and hopefully you continue to talk about stuff that's come up tonight later on. That's the whole point. We are streaming. We are streaming to YouTube and Twitter from this little handsome owl gentleman in the center here. I don't know why I gendered that. Kind of weird. And what that means is that we started this in the midst of COVID, and we've been careful to keep audience sizes small, but also to think about accessibility for people who don't feel comfortable joining us in person. So there may be people watching this in real time online, and we've set it up so that they can also contribute ideas and thoughts. And so Nishay, the IRiS postdoc and program manager, is going to be keeping an eye on the internet for all of us, so you don't need to do that on your phones. To let us know if anybody in our online audience wants to chime in, and she'll bring that to our attention. We're going to be doing this for about an hour. Latoya is here with us through to the very end. Drinks continue to be free. They don't suddenly go up in price. If you want to pop up and grab something in the middle, you're welcome to do so. This is meant to be really organic. The only other thing I want to talk about is that you're in digital futures, and a number of you, this is your first time here and you're wondering what the heck this is, and is it actually even finished yet? The answer is no. There was a forklift in the front walkway yesterday. I was like, guys, can we move this? We're going to have people walking here. This is part of the Cincinnati Innovation District, major state investment, and bringing together university innovation with the private and public sector. This building is full of interdisciplinary efforts at the University of Cincinnati, as well as nonprofits. So if folks know Green Umbrella, they're right upstairs. Elementz is right upstairs on our floor. We feel lucky about that on the 3rd floor. We might actually even be able to bring people up to just kind of see what our floor looks like after this. Yeah. So feel free to wander around on the 1st floor. You can't get up to the, well, you can. They can walk up the stairs.
So you could walk up the
Yeah,
stairs.
you can walk up the stairs. Don't overstay. Don't sleep here tonight. Look, Toya, keep an eye on who might be sleeping here tonight. Just let me know. Okay, so anyway, that's it. We're excited to have you here, and we're going to start tonight with a spoken word performance by Camille Jones, and then Damian Hoskins from Elementz is going to introduce the folks we've invited into the center here, and we're going to go from there. So. Yeah, thanks again. We really appreciate you coming. And Camille, the floor is yours.
Okay, should I walk over there?
Wherever you like. There's more people here, so
Okay, cool.
if you don't want to see more people, don't come here.
Okay, the microphone is the owl, so.
Oh, yeah, the microphone is in the center, so.
Where's your faith? Where is it stored? Tell me, please. I want to know how far you've come to exploding. Shape forgiveness into clay and find a tangible, self-made man. Christened the first solitary night you slept in a dark, unfurnished home, made empty for your thoughts. Smile greedily for the watchers. One's questioning how. How come he speaks like us? How come he doesn't act like them? How articulate and polite and eloquent and intelligent and quiet and docile and passive and passing and non-threatening and acceptable and a credit to your race you are. You are what your people need. Your people need you. Need to be like you. Why aren't they more like you? Why do they make that music? Why do they kill each other? Why don't they care about their futures? Why don't they just get off their asses? Why do they destroy their neighborhoods? Tell us why. Don't you know why? They're your people, right? Your patience, a floorless well, a murky mirror with crooked rippling, refracted reflection confronting. You can scream as loudly as you need down here. They won't hear. I promise. Thank you.
Good grief. Hello, everybody. I'm Damian Hoskins. I'm the executive director of Elementz Hip Hop Cultural Arts Center. Just very briefly, Elementz is the premier, we like to call it the premier hip hop cultural arts center in the city and the region. Started about 20 years ago as a response to the murder of a young Black man named Timothy Thomas by the Cincinnati Police Department. Since then, we have focused very specifically on protecting and advancing and promoting hip hop as culture, as art, and as a global economic and creative force, which includes a whole host of things, such as using your voice. This person, this brilliant human being, just happens to be our senior manager of advancement, as well as a wonderful spoken word artist and a dancer. If you got a chance to see Blink on the side of, what building was that?
The Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve building. Camille and several other dancers worked with Wendy Yu, who's an Australian projection artist, to create a fabulous installation for Blink where they actually projected them dancing on the side of the walls. And that sort of connects to a lot of the conversation that we're going to have today about perception and accessibility, about the arts. But before we jump into that, I definitely want to introduce the folks that are around this circle so we know who is who. And I want to start with, I'm going to assume, Dr. Tammy Brown. Dr. Tammy Brown, Associate Professor of History in the Department and in Global and Intercultural Studies. I'm sorry, I'm old, I can't see.
It's all right.
At Miami University. So welcome, Dr. Tammy Brown. Tiffany Cooper, who's the Director of Community Engagement and Diversity at the CSO. She is also our board vice chair and incoming board chair. A wonderful human being. Ryan Hall, who's a musician and owner of Whited Sepulchre Records and Leaving Things Music. Welcome, Ryan. And then there's Damien. Oh, no, it's me. You've met Camille. And then Amy Tuttle, who is an artist, arts and healing practitioner and senior director of programming at Wordplay Cincy. These are our wonderful conversationalists. And we are going to begin this discussion. And again, to Nathan's point, it is not a talking heads discussion. It's something to be engaged in by all. And really sort of thinking through some of this stuff. Now, I'm a father and I'm old. So I actually don't like the idea of not coming to a conclusion. So this is going to bother me. I like fixing stuff and solving stuff. And so I'm probably going to leave here with a lot of angst. But at any rate, I think this is a very important conversation and discussion point, topic. But the thing that keeps going through my head is this recent experience that I was able to engage in at the CSO. I have gone to this, I'm a graduate from School for the Creative and Performing Arts, and I've been going to the CSO for several years in a very sort of formal capacity. And in most instances, I was one of very few young people of color in that space. Certainly listening to Bach and Beethoven and Rachmaninoff and all those different sort of white Western European artists, I did not feel like I belonged there. I felt like I was an interloper. The accessibility was just by virtue of the fact that I went to SCPA. I lived on Finley Street downtown in the West End, so that's not something that we did on the weekends. But it's not that far away from where I grew up, but it felt like a million miles away from where I grew up. And it didn't feel differently until a young hip hop artist named Lonnie Rashid Lynn, better known as Common, came to the CSO and did a magnificent, what we call in the hip hop community, remix. It's a mashup of hip hop and orchestral music. And that was the first time, and I'm 49 years old. It's the first time in almost 40 years that I ever felt welcome in the in music hall. But I think that is a part of my own individual perception. Nobody ever put a sign out and said no blacks allowed or no black men allowed. There's this, I guess, but another part of that, which will probably add context, is Cincinnati is a very segregated city. I have a love-hate relationship with Cincinnati. There's invisible lines of demarcation that separate race, class, neighborhood, ethnicity, and where you went to high school. It's the easiest way to compartmentalize people. But this about art and accessibility and perception was really sort of, it was an interesting thing to think through, but that experience changed how I saw the CSO, how I saw Music Hall. I'm not entirely sure if there was any sort of reciprocal view. I do know that there were 3 white women sitting in front of me and my fiance, and about the 3rd song in, it gave me the impression that they actually had some common records. They were, they were into it, and they were like, they had the response as if they had been introduced at some point to the hip hop community. And so I have my own biases that were not confirmed, which was great. And so the unfortunate thing, however, is that is not the norm. And so I am curious, that is just an example of my perception about the arts, about accessibility in the arts, and about some of the things that give it context, like place. I don't know if you all are all from Cincinnati, and if you have a similar experience, and if you're not from Cincinnati, what are those experiences in other places? To our panelists, to our conversationalists, I would love to kick this thing off with not necessarily a question, but just the opportunity to share reflection. I know Tiffany actually made the whole common thing happen, so I'm very appreciative of her for that. But I'm sure we all have these various perspectives and experiences, and I would love to hear something from all of you musicians, academics, artists in the healing arts, spoken word artists, brilliant human beings, just to hear that kind of perspective, and then also have other folks chime in. But that's my world, that's my experience, and I hope to God that when my sons are my age, that Cincinnati is different, and that places like the CSO don't even have invisible barriers in front of them. Jonathan Martin, I'll say this and I'll shut up, but Jonathan Martin, the president of the CSO, said to me maybe 5 years ago, the business model the current business model is terrible, primarily because in the next 10 years, his patron base will all be dead because they're old white people. And so there's this shift, but I don't want the shift to be inauthentic.
Right.
I don't want it to be patronizing. I don't want it to be something that's exploitative. And I don't necessarily want it to be a shift in the business model as much as it is a shift in our collective consciousness. So, thoughts, reflections, Amy, what do you think? Sorry.
So much gold in there. There's like a lot of threads to pull on and to weave with. Some things I just heard that caught like my ears and also really like my heart have to do with belonging and crafting and making and story and place, especially place. And I think it's really interesting to be in this space right here, that we're sitting in this like vortex of Cincinnati. We can see the highway. There's 71 right there, and we're in this really fresh environment with this like concentric life cycle like thing happening here. Something that I think about a lot is what does the weaving of belonging actually mean? What does that actually mean? And I think there's something about how it is that we meet each other and where we meet each other, where we expect for the arts to happen, where we don't expect for the arts to happen. The like deconstruction of the stage that really has my attention. It's like, I don't think it's about a business plan either. I don't even think it's about a strategic plan. And I'm in the middle of a strategic plan. It's like, yes to those things. But those are all like our ways of trying to make ourselves more comfortable with what's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's what's uncomfortable that's actually going to reveal the way forward.
Yeah.
I think maybe. I'm so curious. So belonging, place, where do we meet each other so that we can unravel?
I have to chime in. I'm just energetic and loud. So I'm from Cincinnati, born and raised. I have a lot of Cincinnati pride. I did my my undergraduate degree at Harvard, my PhD at Princeton. I spent about 10 years on the East Coast. My first teaching job as a professor was in New York. For me, my Midwestern sensibilities would not allow me to pay that much money for a crappy apartment in a dirty city. And I left my job. And so some people thought I was crazy. If you know how tenure works, I was on a tenure track job. I left with a leap of faith. I come from a family of just spiritual people. I left with a leap of faith to come home. 14 years ago, it's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And I came, when I came to my university, I was visiting. The next year, it turned into a tenure track job. I got a tenure. So for me, I admit I have a little bit of Midwest is the best braggadociousness. You know, God bless Kanye West. You know, we want to send him love and light and healing energy. But that's one thing I love about Kanye. You know, his love for Chicago, his trying to put Chicago on the map. I'm working on a memoir. It's actually a collection of essays and poems, and it's called Fly. And it starts with the mythology of flying Africans, real story. 1803, the Igbo were enslaved. They're on a ship off the coast of Georgia. They decide instead of being enslaved, they jump overboard. Witnesses, you can go to slave narratives, go to Washington, D.C., the National Archives. People who witnessed this, enslaved Africans, and people who heard about it said, oh, they didn't die, they didn't drown, they flew back to Africa, or they walked on water back to Africa. So I take that imagery, combine it with a dream I would have repeatedly as a kid that I could fly. And it was a dream, more like not a Superman cape flying, but I was like running through the air like Kendrick Lamar in All Right, okay? Fast forward to today, for a good 6 years, I didn't dream. And every time I sat down to write poetry, I couldn't write. And for a moment, I was just devastated, and I thought this academic, like narrow system of discipline might have crushed my creativity. But turns out I had undiagnosed sleep apnea. And once it was treated 2 years ago, I started dreaming again. And the first dream was that I could fly.
Wow.
And for me, it goes all back to love of community, because it's called Fly, because I never considered myself to be a true hip hop head until I went to Erykah Badu. Erykah Badu, with my friend Shantae here. Erykah Badu concert opened by Fine Common. And when he went through this medley of hip hop songs, I knew every word, and I was surprised I knew every word. And it's osmosis. It's in your bones. It's in your blood. If you grew up in that era, you know, the golden age of hip hop was so different. It's about education. It's about uplift. It's about Black history. You know, I'm wearing my dashiki. You know, X-Clan. It's all of it, all that love. And for me, flying is all about the community I grew up in Mount Healthy, called the Heritage. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so let me keep this short. I grew up in the Heritage.
You grew up in the Heritage.
I feel like let me stop here. I can talk for days. I can talk for days.
You grew up in the Heritage, okay.
So this is my issue. Even in my field, I feel like even like youngish Black intellectuals who dominate the conversation are mainly East Coast, West Coast, and sometimes South. So even a brilliant writer like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who says violence is the heritage that we have inherited in this country. True. We are sitting on stolen land. We always start there. You know, this country has been the richest country in the world for a very long time because of stolen labor. But my heritage is a community of Black people who love me so much. You can't put a price on it. Where does poetry happen? Where does music happen? It happens standing outside. My friend Neil, that I'm now collaborating with at Aiken High School, teaching African American history, he would freestyle under the street lights. You know, it reminds me of this brilliant Barbadian American writer, Paul Marshall. She passed away a couple years ago. She has this famous essay called The Poets in the Kitchen. It was all about her mother working as a domestic worker, a maid in white homes in New York, suffering all these indignities during the day, but they went home, gathered with their friends around the table, talked about what happened as catharsis, but then used their native language, their Bayesian tones and dialects to restore and renew themselves. Yeah.
So just really quickly, it's completely an aside. Neil is my cousin.
That's what I love about Cincinnati. That's what I
You said
love
you grew up in
about
the heritage.
Cincinnati.
You said
He's
you
my
grew up there.
neighbor. Like I jumped the fence. We're in his yard. Yes.
So Chris Wharton,
Yes. That's what I love about Cincinnati.
his mother is my dad's sister.
That's what I love about
All
Cincinnati.
right, so it's completely separate.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have a perspective from that of a millennial.
Okay.
not just an artist and a multifaceted artist, by the way, but your frame of reference is that of a millennial, right? And so I'm curious of like how you identify perception, space, place in in this level of this thought of accessibility or inaccessibility with the arts.
Well, what's interesting is, and we've talked about this before, but when we think about like rebranding Cincinnati and what that looks like, because there is division, and you can just hear it in the way that like your generation talks about it. And my mom is from that generation, and I'll hear stories about like this or they and us and these people live like this over there, or just feeling like you're sort of boxed in just based off of where you come from and what you look like and what neighborhood you grew up in and what high school you went to. But thinking about like the present day and my experience, I do feel that there is shifting, and I see it happening heavily when we think about the arts. One thing I will say though is if you're not like tapped in with the art scene in Cincinnati, like the underground art scene, you would mistakenly believe that there's nothing really happening here.
that's very true.
People tend to feel like they have to flee Cincinnati in order to cultivate some kind of creative career, and you don't. But that's a part of that division that we talk about. And that's something that we need to figure out how to open those doors up for people and what that looks like, or creating like a bigger magnifying glass so that people know that there's like things buzzing around here. There's events that happen here. There are rappers and dancers and poets that come together for open mic nights and literally perform at these bars on Tuesday nights. But if you don't know about it, if you're not literally in the community, tapped in, you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's welcoming you into the doors and saying, oh, you got to come to this at 8 p.m. every Tuesday, then you won't know that it's happening. And then you find yourself confined to these sort of somewhat limiting exhibitions or events that don't necessarily make you feel seen or represented. You get caught up thinking that the only arts thing that's happening is happening at like music hall with the CSO, and that's what art is. Like these very Eurocentric, the classic sort of presentation of creativity, and that's not all that there is, and that's not the only thing that's of value. So there are things happening, and our challenge is then to, like you said, deconstruct the stage, find those tethers. How can we weave all these different people together and let the whole of Cincinnati know that art looks like this, and it also looks like that, and it can look like this, and it can look like whatever you want it to look like. It all happens in your imagination first.
Right.
So,
I think we make an important point, because it's like, whose art do we privilege to talk about in these spaces in the broader community? So we privilege the larger institutions that have this history that is rooted in whiteness, that is rooted in large donations, that is broadly supported. But then there's this current of all this other beautiful art that is happening that does not get the same love. and the same type of attention and the same amplification in our
Mhm.
space. And so I think that is the challenge for our community in Cincinnati, is to how do we reach out to and amplify and build a community where all art is privileged in that same way. And it starts with community, and it starts with coming together and having conversations like this.
That's such an important point. From a musician's standpoint, I'm curious. This is like all of these points. I think maybe, and everybody feel free to chime in. But all of these points, if this were a formal sort of setting, or formal informal sort of setting, and we were at the office, we would probably be having this conversation, right? And I learned so much from from Camille's perspective, as a millennial, from Tiffany's perspective as an arts administrator executive. But there is this notion of shared values that I think allow for this crossing of those lines of demarcation.
Yeah.
There's an incredible book, it's a hip hop book, it's a business book really, by a guy named Steve Stout, who was a hip hop executive, discovered Nas and helped Mary J. Blige, all those types. But he has this book called The Tanning of America. And the whole premise of the book is that this generation will be the ones that are successful at breaking down these barriers because they are not focused on a physical complexion, but a mental complexion. And that mental complexion causes this tanning, right? And it causes this opportunity to connect on the things that they find in common, that they appreciate, as opposed to the things that differentiate them. And so I'm curious, from a musician, and not just a musician, you like own a record label. So there's a business side of that, right? So there's something to be thought through and discussed when we're talking about not just the creation, but the actual business side of all of that. I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
As I've been listening to everybody speak, I've really been thinking about the accessibility of the means of production of creating music. That's something that is totally different when we think about the way that the music industry used to be run, which is a very vertically aligned, contractually obligated. You had a 5-record deal. You had to make it a certain quota, or else you'd be in the hole, quite a bit. The accessibility of just music production equipment has completely blown the doors off of that. I think, my record label and the music that I create can broadly be kind of classified as experimental, which is just, a bit outside of the normal pop structure, right? Deals with a lot of exploratory expressions and approaches to sound and sound creation. But if I'm being totally honest, the most experimental music that I'm hearing, the stuff that's blowing my mind, right, is the sounds that are being created that's on top 40 hip hop, right, and top 40 pop. There are some young producers that are creating sounds where I'm just like, I have to know, like, how the fuck did you make that, right? And it's just like, oh no, you were on your iPad, you took a flute sample, you put some bit reduction and some distortion on that, and all of a sudden you have this sound that I've never heard before in my life, right? Blowing, like Passion Fruit by Drake, the production on that blew my mind as much as hearing Lamont Young for the first time. And so I think that there's this really cool thing that's happening where young people especially are picking up Ableton, are picking up Fruity Loops, are picking up these music production the software that costs nothing, and not with and just creating sounds that just are incredible, right? And I think that there's this really cool, so outside of doing music and the label and stuff, I'm also, I'm a therapist. And for a long time, I worked primarily with adolescents. And music is such a powerful emotional shortcut, right? And I would always, whenever I'd work with adolescents, I would ask them, like, show me your YouTube playlist. Like, who have you been listening to, right? And they would pull up, what was so inspiring about this is they would pull up, like songs and like music videos and be like, oh, this is like my cousin, right? Or this is like my friend, I know this person, right? And they're making music that really speaks to them. And they're able to do that because the means of production have been so democratized, where you can create a song, you can record it, you can make it sound really, really good, right? Through tons of tutorials on YouTube that show you how to mix, how to, create something that sounds commercially amazing, right? And then put it, through some of these like third-party distributors and have it be on every single streaming platform within minutes, right? That's incredible, right? In the immediate like creation of sound, right? The immediate sort of like kind of like acting on creative impulse, right? To be a little pessimistic on the the record label side, which is taking a bit of a beating, right? What that does is, I think I think we've become very, very good at creating content, but we have been really, really bad in the past 20 years about creating culture, right? And that, and so when I hear you talking about like, there's open mics happening Tuesday nights, right? 1000%. There's things happening every single night in Cincinnati, right? And the only way that we're going to foster that culture, right, of pushing something that is beyond just like aesthetic window dressing for like the individual, right, is by going out.
Wait a minute.
Is by like going out and supporting that, right? Yeah, like going out and being there, and absolutely, and being exposed to something that is challenging and is like rocks you off your axis a little bit. I'll tell one story and then I'll be quiet. So my being involved in experimental music, some of it's very abrasive, very intentionally aggressive, right? And I'll never forget, like, I love this level of engagement of like perception, right? I was at like Tuesday night, at Rake's End, RIP, which was a bar that was really like very like important to music that like couldn't be played anywhere else, because they'd be like, you're making my patrons leave, like get out, right? And I remember like this show, it was a very aggressive, very abrasive noise show. And this person, came in who you could tell had been like, this is probably their last stop on the night. They'd been probably at a couple of other bars. And this person was just like playing this like very like aggressive, abrasive noise music. And most people were like standing there, like you do, like arms crossed, just like, cool. And she would go around, she was like, what is this? Like, no, I don't understand what this, and she would go and ask me like, what is this? Why do you like this? Like, this sounds bad. Why do you like this? Right? And so I think that that if you're going out of your way, and then she stayed for the whole thing. She stayed for the whole show, right? Because there's something here, right? That is like, I don't know what it is, but I'm not repulsed by it, but I kind of want to, move towards it. If it's not for going to those spaces, like, getting off Spotify, getting off YouTube, and actually supporting your friends, going out and seeing live music, we're just going to have endless content that sounds good, right? And works within the algorithm that pushes it towards, greater ears and greater visibility, but we're not going to be creating culture.
Wow.
We have an online question. It's related, I feel like, so maybe you can just continue talking along this line. But so it's from E.G. Pola, who's been with us the whole time, watching online. So thank you for joining us. And the question was, it was talking about just this segregation that exists in the city. And they said, yes, this area has a very isolationist and separationist feeling. As a non-native, it has been a challenge to find place. How can we as artists lead a paradigm shift to welcome newness, to broaden the wealth of experiences and opportunities?
What a wonderful question. And I don't know. and again, like, that's a question that has an end. Now I have recommendations, but I'm not entirely sure that those recommendations would be appropriate. I would love to hear from folks in the audience if you have thoughts about that, because the question is a relevant question. It's what as artists, what can artists do to create, I guess, a more cohesive community, right? That challenges whatever that status quo is. Do you guys, you know who I'd love to hear from? Dr. Jonathan Krieger. Just from an academician standpoint. But if you don't feel comfortable because you have your mask on, I know.
No, I'm happy to talk. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
Just to introduce myself. So I'm part of the institution. I'm actually the interim dean here at CCM. And so I'm extremely curious what you all have to say, because as part of the institution, we are part of this pipeline that's something that we're trying to break or put back together. I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but I think a lot of that does have to have some kind of transgression at a lot of different entry points. So, Damien, you're on the faculty, I think, from the spring, right?
I am, yes.
That has been just an enormous thing for us, because we are starting to break down some of those silos, some of those stylistic silos, some of those historic silos in terms of what we teach and how we teach it and how we perpetuate it, right? But where we break in, where we need to transgress more, I think, is earlier in that educational system, in that cultural creation system, so that experience that you had, Damien, for 40 years and just recently has been broken, isn't replicated,
Right.
Within the next generation. So it's a tough question. It's a tough question because it really takes neighborhood, civic, institutional buy-in, and then what the resources are that we would need to actually enact some real change instead of just talking about it, which is very easy to do, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in, but I'm really grateful to hear what you all have to say, because we institutionally need to respond to these mandates, these charges for change, and create the kinds of community instead of the aesthetic window dressing that we might call it, in what we have done since time immemorial.
And it's a paradigm shift for sure. I had the good fortune of teaching a hip hop class at CCM last spring, and I had a class, probably about 30 students at varying levels, from PhD level to master's degree to undergrad, and they were all incredibly nervous. And so this may address a little bit of the question, the online question. They're all incredibly nervous the very first day and the second day, and in fact for a really long time, because their whole thought process was, how do I take the training that I've had in orchestral music for all of these years and land a job in a symphony someplace? And that was their only focus. And because it's so competitive, and those experiences are blind experiences, and they have to do it in this sort of isolated space and that sort of thing, they were trepidatious about their own skill sets, the viability of it. And so it became less about them being artists and more about them marketing themselves as commodities. So the good thing about hip hop culture is hip hop actually takes what's in the house and tries to make, if you know anything about hip hop culture, it started in 1973. The Bronx was burning. And these guys took what they had at their disposal and made an entire culture of it. In fact, the blackout in 75 in New York allowed for a lot of people to steal DJ equipment. And that's how they got really like the on the ones and twos. Like that was the start of that. So
Preparation.
right.
Right?
Well played. But what I did in this class, which I thought was I didn't think it was novel. I just thought like let's use the hip hop mentality to help address some of your issues or your concerns. And they were able to leverage the things that we were talking about from, there's this fearlessness in hip hop. There's this intent, especially in the beginning years, this intent to break down those barriers, to not be excluded from, what art and the creation of art was. But none of these guys had access to ballet classes or orchestral class or, violin lessons or being able to go to art museums and or go to the opera. So they used their voice. They took the turntables that their parents had and the records that their parents had to make sound, right? They couldn't go to the ballet, so they got old refrigerator boxes and went outside and created an entire dance form. And so I was trying to share with them, like, use that kind of creative mindset in your creative pursuit. And I will tell you one example that was really brilliant and had absolutely nothing, well, it had something to do with music. I had two guys who were brass instrument players. One guy played a tuba, one guy played a trumpet. And what I did not recognize is that there was somewhat of a monetary barrier to actually playing those instruments because you have to buy mutes, and mutes cost like $300.
Yeah.
I challenged them to use, this hip hop sensibility to try to figure something out. And we did we had this project, and they actually leveraged what was at their disposal, which at the time was a 3D printer. And they actually created mutes that would normally cost $300 for 15 cents out of wood particles.
Wow.
And they work just as good and or better than the $300 mutes. And I was like, that's hip hop. That's hip hop. That's taking, a burning situation, leveraging what you have at your disposal to create something that could further the art, right? That's being creative in your creative pursuits. And I think that may be something that it may not necessarily, it will also be a shift in the thinking of those who hold the purse strings and the policies, but on the front lines, it will be individuals who will challenge even themselves, right? And also to be able to let go of the inhibitions and fears and not attempt to commodify themselves, but attempt to love what they do to move them to a completely different level. And I think that may help to address some of the online question, but I'm curious, does anybody else have thoughts about that?
I just want to chime in real quickly because it connects to stuff that Camille was saying earlier. Cincinnati does have this incredible underground arts and performance scene. I love it. Absolutely love it. It's hard to figure out your way into. I think one of the things that's a feeling in the person's question is, how do I break into that? How do I find my way into that? And I have kind of two feelings about that. One is wanting everybody to be on it, and one is wanting to protect it because it feels fragile. And so how do you bridge that, right? Like what do we need to engage with somebody like the person that asked the question, but also protect the sacred space of creation the community builds in its earliest stages? Because I feel like a lot of the amazing things about Cincinnati are the naivete and joy in that scene as people are discovering community and discovering co-creation. And I guess one thing I would say is it requires advocates. It requires people. I would say, Damien, that Elementz is one of those advocates that says there's this amazing thing happening. Let us lift that up. There are established places that have the money, the bandwidth, the reach. But let's be thoughtful about protecting the community building while at the same time lifting up the efforts. And so that's where my head is about this. Is don't everybody come all at once, because this is special just the way it is right now, but also this would benefit from more people knowing about it. It's a
For
hybrid
sure.
broker
It's
that
unbalanced.
that is a really an interesting thing that every city has to navigate.
I want to make an observation, then ask a question. So for the question posed here, I will say even myself, since I lived on the East Coast for 10 years, and I found that when I was in New York, and I was in Philly, even Boston, there's such a critical mass of creative people who are on my conscious wavelength that it was just beautiful. And I think I've been chasing that experience really ever since college. And I had one of my worst creative experiences. I'm not going to go into details, but with an African-American cinematographer that I tried to collaborate with, who like whitewashed my script. And it was like, whoa. Like my optimism used to carry the day, but I realized it was because I was in a community of like-minded conscious people that it worked. So for the question posed, I would say we're living in a historic moment full of contradictions. On one hand, you have social media, you have the internet, which the downside is, as you put it, what did you say? Aesthetic window dressing for the individual, right? There's such a high level of narcissism and self-interest that I find even artists poets I like, I look at their Instagram and I'm just like, oh my God, one more selfie. You know what I mean? So where's the soul? Where's the culture? I wish I could time travel. I'm an old soul. I'm young at heart. I say I should have been alive during the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
But the point is, they didn't all agree. Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes would argue. You know what I mean? Like, I love Langston and Zora's blues aesthetic, and that's what I'm working with even in my own work. And so I think to find your community, you can sometimes find the best of the virtual world. So I actually published an ebook called The Art of War and Peace, which was a collaboration with poets around the world, US, Australia, UK, etc. And this was after one of the umpteenth shootings. And I just said, this is ridiculous. So I did the artwork. They contributed the poems, but it was mainly through relationships forged online. Right? So I'm from Cincinnati, so it's home for me, and I feel very loved and happy. I have heard from people who aren't from here that it's cliquish, so I feel for them. I think I'm welcoming, you know what I mean? Like, I try to welcome people. Hey, my friend here, Megan, who moved here. But I don't want the person online who asked the question to just feel like an outsider. I would say, get in where you fit in. Find, your like-minded community, but also keep your eyes. Like, I've been writing poetry in French. I've surprised myself. Like, I've been writing poetry in French, and I've been making connections with Senegalese artists. So, and this is all because I have WhatsApp and, Instagram and etc. And my issue with Americanness is I feel like we're always so, even folks who are woke, we're so America-centric. So for me, my focus has always been diasporic. I teach the African diaspora. And so even what I do, what I produce, I'm interested in multiple, languages, multiple ways of communicating from visual art to poetry to short essays, just all the different media. And I think the more you free yourself, we are living in a fearful time.
Yeah.
It's about freedom versus fear.
Yeah.
And this idea of marketing, since the economic downturn in 2008, my students are very fearful. Are they going to get a job?
Yeah.
And even my advice to my students has changed. You know what I mean? But I think, if we do cultivate that sense of, spiritual foundation, but it's such an individual, personal thing. You can't force anyone to do that, right? That's where the next level is.
I think too about when you mentioned cultivating your community and finding those people that are like-minded. I think that takes a little bit of risk-taking.
It does.
And that's just on a human level. If you really want to partake in the journey of life, you do have to step out a little bit of your comfort zone, inch by inch. But those inches add up, and they're important. So at the smallest level, taking the risk of deciding, I'm gonna go to that that open mic and possibly share. Even if you don't share, you just went, and that was something, because maybe for weeks you were talking yourself out of going. And just by taking those little small steps, you're on that voyage toward cultivating that community, or even just like starting a new skill. Maybe you thought of learning to play the guitar for a really long time. You just kept talking yourself out of it. Just decide one day, or get to that point where you can make that decision. No rush, no rush. You gotta do that on your own pace. Do it on your own pace so it feels real and it feels authentic. But taking those small steps and choosing something for you, choosing growth, choosing to evolve, and those like-minded people will come.
Yeah.
I think it starts with you always.
Yeah. And look around, because I think sometimes we think art has to happen in certain spaces.
That's
It
true.
needs to be a music hall. It needs to be in the underground. Art can start right where you are in your neighborhood. Look around to see who is around you. Who can you co-create with? What are the resources that are right where you're located? You never know. That's the ingenuity of like hip hop, which is looking around. What are the resources around me? Where are the people around me that we can take something from nothing and create something brand new? And that is where the most beautiful art happens. And so sometimes I think we put pressure on ourselves to be like, I got to connect with this community because that's where it's happening. But it's like, it can happen right where you are. Cincinnati has 52 neighborhoods, very distinct, lots of resources, lots of community groups. Just start where you are.
You were going to say, oh, hi, Brett. I ain't ready.
I was going to just talk about, as far as, like she said, inserting yourself at your pace, because you do have to take a step out there and get the risk and expose yourself to a crowd that's unfamiliar. But the trailblazers that are here in Cincinnati, the underground that you appreciate, that people have learned to appreciate, they gave stuff away for years to make a dent in the city so that someone could pick it back up. So people have sacrificed. My mom being one of them. There is a 38-year-old now free jazz concert that's been happening since the development of Swift and Commons. It had to be given away. And a lot of young people got their first chance on that stage at Swift and Commons. It had to be given away. So the people here who do have the resources or the fundraising capabilities, they got to be willing to give it away because it's that important. It's something that's so important you can't hold on to it and grip it with white knuckles. You gotta give it away. And so the people who are here to do have the resources to fund something, I think it just we need to constantly be encouraging each other to promote something for free, to host something for free, to get a venue to be willing to let some artists play for free. You know what I mean? That's that you have to give it away. And that makes that person who is thinking about not going because they don't want to pay or whatever, it makes it that much easier. And it picks it up, and like you said, the connections become organic, to your point, where it's not forced. I got to go here because these people are here. The connections aren't forced, they become more organic, especially when it's free. And that's hard to promote for the promoter, of course. But there are people who want the city to be the thing of the jewels that you talk about. Because you want to keep it, you don't want too many people to find out about it because you don't want it to get spoiled. But you want that thing to be a Cincinnati jewel so bad that you want to keep it going too. You don't want anything to stop it, and you definitely don't want money to be the reason why people don't get to experience it. So you have the trailblazers have to keep being the ones that are donated to and financed to give it away.
You know what I would, and I 100% agree. My fear, as we talked, began the conversation, and place was a part of that discussion, is the culture of Cincinnati. This is my experience now, so I'm not. But if your experience is different now, I completely appreciate it. The culture of Cincinnati seems to be first exploitative.
Really?
It's been my experience. And so the reason that the giving away is so important, but it seems to be on a cycle, is at some point people try to exploit it. and
So give me some
undermine
details,
it.
give me some details, and then you see those.
I mean, I'm here to give some, but I don't want to sully anyone.
I can give you a whole bunch
I'm
of-
just not aware, I'm not aware.
Yeah.
So maybe we can have a side conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
Yes,
it's necessary
throw it out.
to sully anyone, but yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just start talking, y'all. Just start talking.
I'm not too artsy, so I'm just listening, observing. It's also fascinating.
Hi, I'm Dominique.
I can't hear you.
Go ahead. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that a little better? Okay. I'm
Stand
Dominique.
up, Dominique.
Okay.
You got the floor. It's all you.
Put you on the spot. Put you on the spot.
Dominique. I'm a PhD student here at UC studying biomedical engineering.
Wow.
Congrats.
Secondhand embarrassment. This talk about art is so interesting. I'm not an artist, but some may differ. Some may have different opinions about being a STEM, being an engineer, designing stuff. But everybody's perception is very interesting, especially in regards to like the African diasporic. I guess just poetry, storytelling. I've always found that to be very fascinating. But I did have a question in terms of, what is, I apologize for this, but as an artist, what's the fine line of, like you mentioned, the aesthetic window dressing, what's the fine line from when that seems appalling to appealing as an artist? So,
That's a good
like,
question.
I remember maybe about a week ago. I'm sorry? Oh, I think it wasn't a question.
No, that's a great question.
I was listening to Breakfast Club and Method Man was saying, rappers are great liars.
Great liars, yeah.
And I was for being actors, and I was like, So that aesthetic window dressing of like, just using rappers as an example, the chains, dealing, on the side of the street or whatever have you, versus like you mentioned, that generation of hip hop, about education, community building, uplifting, where that transition happened to where that window dressing, seemed more like, I'd rather do that than kind of stick to what this is, because that seems like it's providing more of, accessibility, opportunities versus, that communal building, that family-oriented educational aspect and, hip hop and art doesn't seem to be like the way, as people may say. I think it's different, but yeah, that's just my question.
That gets to, that literally gets to my question around the whole notion of whether it's aesthetic or appalling. It gets to the heart of this question around whether or not we are exploiting, or we're in this space where it's much easier to exploit. So to that end, and I'll definitely tap into you guys real quick. It was such a fascinating question that it just got my mind going. Cincinnati in and of itself, but not just Cincinnati. For me, my experience has been that there's been some levels of exploitation. When you think about hip hop and the transition from Heavy D and Rakim and Queen Latifah and these folks who are building up, the focus was different. Then money came in.
Yeah.
And so when you think about my experience with Cincinnati, even with Elementz, right? For a very long time, Elementz has been an organization that has had set opportunities for young people to find voice, express themselves through dance, and so on and so forth. But in order for us to be funded, we had to be we had to partner with white Western European arts organizations so that they can check their diversity, equity, inclusion policy. Right? And so then you're demeaning the art form, you're demeaning the skill set the young person is trying to develop, so on and so forth. Then you're looking at hip hop as a thing, a commodity, not a culture. And it is a culture. It is a culture. So that level of exploitation, I don't have an answer for that question because I get really
Can I
pissed
make
off
a
about
counter?
it.
Can I make a counter argument?
Sure.
Let me counter. Okay, but first, your question, help me remember the question I forgot to ask, is how do we break through the noise? Let's say if you're making meaningful art, poetry, etc. How do you break through the noise if the people who are getting all the attention are the window dressing? But, or should we just not care, right? So that's to piggyback off your question. But I'm gonna counter.
Please.
So I'm a pragmatic person, and I'm all about the Aikido kind of switch here, okay? So what's going on now in my field, I teach African American history, and there's all this legislation, 2 bills in particular being debated in Ohio. You can't say gay, you can't say, you can't talk about race, you can't talk about intersectionality, yada, yada, yada. And I say, well, I teach American history. You know what I mean? Like, I teach American history. And so for me, when you're looking for funders to fund what you want, I would say as long as the product that you are producing is authentic and they're not kind of revising the lyrics or revising what your film looks like or whatever, as long as it's authentic to what you want to produce, you can take the funding and do you. You know what I mean? Like I say, I guess we live in a world, again, back to the foundation of this country, stolen land, stolen labor, et cetera. Who has the resources to get the film done? Who gets to get the album done? If everybody's woke now, and keep in mind, this is bittersweet for me, George Floyd's tragic death. I lived in Minneapolis for 2 years. I have very good friends who lived through all of that, and they were on the ground, right? For me, the fact that everybody's woke and we even have new hires at my university. I went to a dope drag queen show last night. It was fire, but it's because we have new hires, right? I'm happy about that, but I'm angry too that it took so long to get there.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'd rather have the dope drag show than not have it at all. I'd rather have the funding to say, we're gonna do us in such a profound way to push the conversation, to push the dialogue, to elevate, that whether you check your diversity box or not, that's you. We're on another level. Is that you want to counter back?
It's no. It's only to suggest I get your point, and I agree with your point. It's to degree. So it's for us. It is not just that the funding happens and is available. It's the percentage of funding that is available. So it's an equity issue. It's
you're saying it's such itty bitty crumbs that it's then okay. I feel like you know what I'm going to say. The fundamental issue is this, like back to Cincinnati being about where did you go to high school? So my parents sent me to private school, 5th grade to 12th grade, Cincinnati Country Day, and it gave me a very healthy sense of entitlement. Like a sense of entitlement every Black person should have in this country. And I will negotiate. I will make that crumb into a cake. We will have a feast. You know what I'm saying? But I feel you. But it comes out of my faith background too. You know what I mean? Like it comes out of a lot. Yeah.
I want to just. Oh, go ahead.
Because I know we're a bit of a time crunch, so I definitely want to tap into some folks who haven't heard. So let me go with you, and
This is
then
the way you're meant to feel. Though.
Yes, it's too much to say. It's too much.
No, I just wanted to say this is an amazing conversation, and for me, it's very emotional, actually, because I feel like I've been chasing the arts my entire life. I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer, I'm a psychologist, but I made this decision to go into engineering when I was just out of high school, and my other pathway would have been the arts. So I kind of been chasing this ever since I left it, and I never quite found my way back into it, and it's very painful, actually. And in Cincinnati, I've always had this, and I'm not from here. I'm not even from this country. I'm from Europe. And I moved to Cincinnati, and I feel out of place since I'm here. And I have my little tiny pockets in which I'm very comfortable. But
not in general, right? I feel always like I'm foreign here. And this underground art scene that everybody's talking about, I've heard of it. I've seen a couple of things, you know. I've been to open mics. But it is like not something that ever became something I feel like I can just tap into. And I think part of it is because all the initiatives are focused on teenagers and kids. It's not actually welcoming to adults. I feel like when I moved to Cincinnati when I was in my mid-30s, at this time, everybody here has families and kids and stays at home and does whatever they do. I don't know what they do. And so the one thing that I want to say that made me, you know, I was at the brink of leaving Cincinnati so many times, but one of the things where I was like, this is amazing, was when the first, I don't even remember what it was called, before Blink.
Luminosity.
Luminosity, thank you. And so I ran into this because I live downtown and I just happened to be there and I was just blown away. And then Blink came and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing that something like this can happen here. And it not completely changed my mind around it, but it was like, okay, if this can happen here, then there's good things here. Right. And so I've been there every day, every time it happened. I volunteered for it. I was like trying to really get into it. And this year I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed because it was so commercialized, so spread out. It was only about food trucks and buying your Blink thing for $25 a piece. And it was not this like walking through discovery, exploration, find this amazing piece here that you didn't expect around the next corner and move through and experience it. The magic that I had before was completely gone. Completely gone. And it was just this like masses moving through the city. And I think it was the money issue, right? It was becoming a thing that the city could make money off, and so it was exploited for this. So I do think that there's a lot of this exploitation happening if one is not careful. And and that's basically just experience I wanted to, you know, as one example of how I experienced it. There was an exploitation here very quickly after something very magical.
You're always welcome down at Elementz, and we'll teach you how to DJ. You come down to Elementz. That's hip hop. You can always come down there. I'm sorry, you. Yes, you.
No, not me. I think my question was pales.
No, it's just as important. It's just as important.
It's a conversation. Well, I was just thinking how important it is to give money and not just put out a Black Lives Matter statement, which a lot of organizations did.
Right.
And then if they didn't put their money where their mouth was, then that was a problem. Right? So give something of yourself, even if you don't, as an organization, have very much. You know, what are you putting on the line here?
Right.
Great point. Hey, you know, I think the thing that that I want to make sure I'm being clear about, just from my own personal
I
perspective.
gathered that you were more nuanced.
It's the level of exploitation that we have experienced, particularly at Elementz, but I think that I've experienced throughout the course of my time in the arts in Cincinnati. It has been real, it has been palpable, but I don't think it's just about the money, the white Western European arts, all that kind of stuff. I think it's more about the fact that there has to be a paradigm shift in how we engage with one another as human beings. And that sounds a bit esoteric, but it's not. It's really sort of just, that's the basis of what I think is going to shift these conversations towards something where we don't even feel like strangers in this room. You know what I mean? Like, that's really what we're trying to accomplish. Because I think if everybody in here is, I only know like 3 of y'all, but the reality is that this conversation has broken down specific barriers that, that almost equate to those lines of demarcation. And I don't care where any of y'all went to high school. How about that? But it's a very Cincinnati thing, right? And so it's like, now from here, more can be developed based on the richness of this dialogue. And I'm hoping you do come down to Elementz. I'm dead serious. So, right. And so then then when we begin to have like this groundswell of human connectivity through the arts, through this level of accessibility, which is real, then we can begin to shift how since the culture of the city, right? Because I think the culture of the city is rooted in 100 years ago, right? And that is the DNA, but it doesn't have to be that way for this next generation of creators and business people and PhD folks, you know what I mean? Like brilliant folks, like and scientists, and but I just think that the money, the things that are so commercial, seems to be the primary focus, when if we just invert that to have culture be the primary focus, I think whatever is going to come from an economic standpoint will come, but the shelf life will be way longer, because culture lasts way longer than the money you can spend on it.
Are the artists then responsible for addressing the societal disconnects, or like where does that start then?
That's a great question. I think everybody's responsible for it.
Yeah.
I think one, because I think we're at a time crunch, right? Like I think, well, for me, I got way more days behind me than I had in front of me. So I would love to see like everyone, not this kumbaya, because I don't want this to sound corny. I don't want it to sound corny.
Let it be corny.
I mean, but I really want risk. All right, let me risk being corny. It would be really dope. It would be really dope if we were all able to sort of work towards these shared values, right? And this comes from, I don't know if you guys remember Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
I remember a long time ago, Schoolhouse Rock had this song about America being a melting pot. And then my classroom teacher said to me, my social studies teacher, back when they taught social studies, my social studies teacher said, but it's actually not. It's more like a tossed salad. And the notion of a tossed salad is that those individual things keep their integrity, but they come together in this harmonious, connection, and it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I think having shared values and coming together on those points of shared values and that synergy can help move us towards that. And that is artists, that is scientists, that is, teachers and business folks. And nobody has to lose anything.
What was the tune of that one again? Was that the More Perfect Union one?
No, it was like the Great American Melting Pot. Yeah, my man. Thank you very much. I knew it wasn't crazy.
No, I got you. But if I can just rip off what you're saying,
absolutely.
Damian, part of I think what you're naming is these dynamics of comfort and discomfort, right? That part of what we're talking about in Black arts moving into white institutional spaces is necessarily a discomfort, right? That discomfort needs to happen in order for an institutional foothold to take place. But at the same time, we need to feel comfortable in those spaces, right? We need to be welcoming to each other, sort of creating and inviting community. At the same time, that is dependent on us all being sort of vulnerable to a kind of discomfort and an openness to a kind of discomfort.
Yes, 100%. Very well said. That's exactly what I was trying to say. You said it in way fewer words.
I've been like a lover of history since I was 10 years old. I feel like we can learn from historical movements. But let me preface this with, it takes work.
For sure.
Debbie Allen from Fame, I'm like, it takes sweat and work. So if we look at the Harlem Renaissance, if we look at the Black arts movement in the 1960s, if we look at the third wave feminism in the 1970s, mainstream presses were not publishing Black authors. They said, we're going to start our own publication sources. You know, mainstream presses weren't publishing women. We're going to start our own venues. So this is how I think we go from individuals to culture. But it takes work.
Yeah.
So we could talk for days, seriously, as we are talking right now. We could talk for days about we want to come together, you know, we want to be a tossed salad. But unless we have some folks who are willing to do the work to create certain venues, whether it's, for example, I'm in January, it's not a selfish plug, but I'm going to give you this as an example. In January, I'm launching a blog art series on Instagram called The Dreamer Who Sat by the Door. And it's all about art and music of the African diaspora. And I'm interviewing artists from Senegal, from Trinidad, et cetera. And I'm also showing some of my own art. And it really comes out of my using music during the pandemic to stay happy. So making connections with family and friends, this is who I'm listening to. And it was so crucial to me and my family to stay joyful during the pandemic. Now I want to share with more people. So, you know, I don't know how many people are going to follow my blog, but still, it is one space that I'm saying, I think more people need to know about these artists. So I'm going to interview them. Like this woman, she raps in French. She's from Senegal. Her name is Mina Levoile. And she's Muslim, and she talks about wearing a veil and how it being so unusual for a woman to rap in French, and she's Muslim. Like, she's dope. Like, I use her in class, and I just randomly on Instagram said, can I interview you for this blog? She said yes, you know? So, I mean, that's my passion. So that's the work I'm doing. But if there's someone in this room who wants to do the Cincinnati work, you know, to amplify Cincinnati voices, I don't know what that looks like. You know, it could be an online publication, you know, it could be, I don't know.
Podcasts.
Yeah.
How are you tying that title into the book?
You talking about my Jimi Hendrix book?
No.
Oh, which?
By the book.
I didn't want to get so deep with it, but yeah. It's inspired by two titles: The Spook Who Sat by the Door, Sam Greenlee, and Freedom Dreams by one of my favorite historians, Robin D.G. Kelly. I'm inspired by both of their work because the way that Sam Greenlee and The Spook Who Sat by the Door, this is a novel written in 1973, turned into a film. The film is 73. Don't quote me on that for the novel, but he talks about what if a guerrilla warfare happened in the U.S. And it was a man trained, first Black guy to enter the CIA, trained to take these tools, and then he takes it to his neighborhood in Chicago, and they launch guerrilla warfare to say we want social justice, we want racial justice. But it's the way he used satire and absurdity to get at the absurdity of white supremacy that I always return to. I'm like, it's a hilarious book. You know what I mean? So in my blog intro, I explain all of this. And my launch party is January 7th. I'll let y'all know. It's online.
I do think that work does need to be done. I think this conversation is catalytic in that work for sure. So definitely grateful for Nathan and Alloy and IRiS. And I think this will probably be the first of many of these interactions and more of these hard conversations. I don't know what we're doing as far as time. I know we haven't solved a damn thing. And I'm with all these hard questions, I'll be pissed off driving home.
Start the clock. Cincinnati artists. There's a solution.
I think
Cincinnati
the tension is the alchemy, though.
Yeah,
it's like
you're right.
The juxtaposition between transformation and protection.
Yeah.
In everything that we've talked about.
Yeah.
It creates this, like, I feel it. I'm like, ooh, it's palpable.
It's palpable, right?
Because it's moving.
Yeah.
And it's alive, and we're like back to sitting on the edge of the city, like physically in this place. We're sitting on the edge of the city. Mm-hmm. I think when we can let ourselves encounter the discomfort of the tension of what is transformational and practical, it needs protection and also needs uplifting and illumination and support, while not knowing where we're going. I don't think we know.
No.
And I think that's kind of really amazing. And
I
think
hate
that-
it, but
I
I
know.
get it. I get it, though.
Totally, yeah.
I get it.
And I feel like I feel I said discomfort so many times, and I feel like I'm always with young people. I'm always talking about vision. Like, what's your vision? Like, what's next? Where are you going? Where's the future? What's the future in the future? And this like real Sankofa stuff of like, well, but what was back there?
Yeah.
And like, what's right now in the
Exactly.
soup that we're sitting in? And this, these feelings that I also have
Yeah.
about protection and exploitation and stories
Mhm.
that I also have about elevation
Yeah.
of stories. So, yeah, I'm really here for the alchemy of that.
That's
Just,
awesome.
like,
And I'll
curious.
just say one thing just to kind of like build off that. I think as much as it takes tension and bravery and stuff like that, it takes accountability of especially white gatekeepers who have done the work, right, but have not created equitable spaces where especially like, you know, Black musicians feel comfortable coming into white spaces from a micro level. You know, it's been, horror stories, you know, of trying to feel like there is home, like in these places where underground music is happening and stuff like that. So it takes a lot of accountability and real work in breaking down some of those gatekeeper kind of positions that, you know, especially white male artists, you know, like myself have held for a long time and still hold. So,
I just wanted to add, oh, I'm sorry.
Please.
Yeah, I just, you said, you know, it takes work, but honestly, how much work? Because, you know, like you said, that labor seems to always be put on us. I'll speak my experience, but it seems to always be put on us. And it's like, you know, we come together as a tossed salad, but some of us, you know, want to remain as individual fruits, vegetables. But it's like the institution when it comes to like artists, right, that has been put into place that, you know, takes and recreates and then profits and then, you know, money comes in and it's like, okay, we're all fighting, you know, to try to get to the top. Our artists are fighting to try to get to the top, and then we tightrope between, you know, compromising like our integrity and what we believe in and just, you know, maintaining, you know, what our true artistic values are. So really, it takes work, but is it work that's going to work? Because we've been working, and it's like, okay, we're working, and it's like, we hear you, we see you, you know, why don't we work together? And then that work becomes watered down or revamped or something else, and then it's like, okay, now we're back at square one. So, you know, as artists, like, how much work can one take on before their shoulders and their backs give? And then, you know, they're put off by this whole thing of being artistic as a next level, and then, like you said, going into something else. So, like, they chased art, and it's like, you know what, I can't, I'm tired, like, I just can't do it. I'm gonna just do something else, and I let this art kind of be in the back burner, and then always looking at it up on the horizon, and not, it just, I don't know. I just
No, it's an absolutely valid question, and it's one that I don't know if anybody else has the answer to. I never have an answer for that, but I've been asking that question for a really long time. And my grandmother used to tell me as a kid, like, look, man, there's a difference between movement and progress. And I mean, like, hamsters move. They ain't going no damn where. You know what I mean? Like, and so whatever the move is, whatever the action is, it has to be toward a particular end with strategy in place. So you're actually further along than what you started. And then you can hand it off to the next generation, and they would be further along, but they wouldn't be starting at ground zero. But when you're talking about this from a collective standpoint, progressing as a community of artists, whether you're from a diverse group or whether you're gatekeepers or whatever, what we're ultimately saying is the old system doesn't work anymore. And so maybe we start there. You know what I mean? Like, the old system doesn't work anymore. And if that's the stage, let's not just deconstruct the stage. Let's blow the damn thing up. Like blow it up and start over. You know what I mean?
Well, doesn't that take us back to the question of where you went to high school and what neighborhood? And so I'm thinking about wordplay, and I guess I wanted to hear more about what wordplay is, what your outlook is, and how positive you are. You know, you're going into mostly public schools, is it?
Yeah.
And, sorry, are you from Wordplay?
She's
No,
from
she's from
Wordplay.
Wordplay.
Then where are you from?
I'm from the CSO.
Oh, you're from the CSO,
Mhm.
and you're from Wordplay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was vice versa. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I guess I wanted to hear more from you because I didn't hear as much from you tonight.
Mhm.
But don't we just have a fundamental problem of this infrastructure and these school systems that are getting funding from these different communities? It doesn't happen all over the world. You know, in Britain, you've got all the tax money goes into all of the schools, no matter what neighborhood you're in, and so you know, it's Elementz is going into the schools, Wordplay is going into the schools, but why don't we just change things at the, you know, at the fundamental level to make this a more equitable system? So that's another, you know, another topic, but that's a hard road to.
That's a big topic.
Go down.
Today I was listening to NPR and they were talking about gerrymandering and how in Michigan,
Right.
there's actually been major, like just normal everyday people who've come together to really pretty much fix their gerrymandering problem, you know? But again, it takes work, you know, like Google gerrymandering, NPR, Michigan, and you'll see the story, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Community though.
Mhm.
All comes back to community. I mean, the thing that I keep thinking about when you're talking about exploitation of money is that money's scared. Money is always scared. It's always scared it's going to be lost. And where courage comes from is community. You're not going to get your courage from money.
Right.
That's where you have to build from. Money can enable things, but it's always scary. It's always cautious. Right? It's always, somebody's always keeping it and trying not to spend it unwisely, but courage is what brings us alive. It's what
Right, but it would be
does the
good
work.
if we had more opportunities and more schools and, you know, and not such a huge. Difference.
I agree. But this would be a long ass because I got some stuff to say.
I'm not sure we're worried about people sleeping over.
No, particularly about the education part, because I taught school for 13 years, and like you're 100% right. All of this stuff is fundamental, like, and we have a responsibility of deconstructing this stuff. I don't really like adults. I love children. It's always been my view that there hasn't been I've never met a kid who purposefully hamstrung themselves. It's always some jackass adult or irresponsible grown up who puts these barriers, puts these things in their minds, puts these things in their way. And these institutions that we're discussing right now, so part of that infrastructure that's going to make their lives that much more difficult. This work, if there is an end, or if I can drive home with some solace, I know that I will be able to focus on that, the work that we're doing in the schools. But that's not easy. That's all politics.
It is.
All of it.
It is.
Every bit of it is politically driven, and very little of it has to do with student well-being.
Right.
It's all test scores and this bull crap, but not the holistic development of a child. Right. And these infrastructures are in place to be scared money. But you know, so then the focus is wrong. Right. And the focus is wrong because the focus of these old people is on the commodification of something.
And we're only gonna support our little neighborhood, and we're not.
And we're right. And so then it's isolationism and it's all of this elitism and all this sort of segregation, and that thing begins to perpetuate. So to your question, I don't know. To your question, I don't know. To the question that was online, I don't know. But if you left it to me, if I, could do something about it, and you said, all right, Damien, go ahead and fix this, a whole lot of people will be fired. A whole lot of people will be fired. A whole lot of these institutions, and not maliciously, maliciously at all. It wouldn't be like, I hate you. It would be like, listen, we actually have to make this better, right? And what we're doing right now, it's not better. And if you're gonna roll out your strategic plans and all of your predictive analytics, if you're honest, you know that in the next 5 years, it's gonna be exactly the same that it was 5 years ago, right? And
So how much energy then do we put into the deconstruction? I ask this question a lot. I'm like, yes to the pulling it apart, into the naming what doesn't work. Also, like, I'm thinking about James Baldwin saying you can't integrate into a house that's on fire.
It's on fire.
So then also, just like, why don't we just build something else?
Something
Like,
else.
while it's falling down,
Right.
while it's not working, while a lot of us are standing like in the part of the river where like it's a waterfall right here, and we're just trying to do a lot of this kind of thing, being like a human dam, so to say. There's a lot of that happening in every sector of our culture, way beyond the arts. Way beyond the arts. And I just think about like one of the potencies of the arts that I think like brings any of us to a conversation like this is that it's generative. Because we're gonna like create something, we're gonna build something. And maybe it's not even a solution. Maybe sometimes it's a response to the thing that's burning down or falling apart. Sometimes it's just like, I have this thing that I have to say at Aiken High School, and I better say it. I better say it. So I really agree with you, and I also I don't want us to get lost in all our like brilliance with the like pulling something down or helping it fall apart. It's like, it's going to do that anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
And embracing other institutions, because we talk about these privileged institutions, we talk about school districts, we talk about the large art institutions, but when we talk about children and education, we don't often think about like, how do we partner with our rec commission that are seeing children every day? How do we partner with our YMCAs where like there are other ways to Boys and Girls Club, these other organizations that don't get the same privilege and the same donations. How do we partner and uplift them? Because we can have the same impact just in a different way. And so we have to kind of deconstruct how we think about institutions and what institutions we're partnering with.
And to your point, this is a great point, Tip. And to your point, though, it's like, it's also like just a reimagining of the solutions. The pulling down, that's just because I tend to choose violence sometimes. But it's like, so I gotta be what I mean? But it's really reimagining the solutions. And because we are creatives, most of us, in some way, right? Chances are what we do reimagine is going to also be very dope.
Okay,
Right?
I know we're about to go, but I have to say this. So Moses wasn't allowed into a certain part because of what his whole generation did, okay? But there was a generation that was allowed. And we sit here and we talk about these kids and we talk about these things. My son, my 15-year-old son, we were at the skating rink and he was looking at some people out he was looking at this guy out on the skating rink, and he was wanting me to pay attention to the size of the wheels on his skates. And he's like, Mom, so you see that guy right there? The size of his wheels is tiny and it's so cool and he's doing such a good job. And I'm like, where? And he's like, right there. He's got the white t-shirt on. And I'm like, where? There's a whole bunch of people with white t-shirts on. He's like, right there. You see him? He's got the jeans on. I'm like, yeah, I got jeans on. So he's like, look, don't you see his skates? The little tiny skates right there. And after he finally pointed him out, he was on this skating rink, but he never once described him
As
as
a black guy. Wow.
Interesting.
it's our kids that's gonna do it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
And it's not gonna take them reimagining anything. It's not gonna take them coming together and having these think tanks and doing all that. They're just gonna do it. So that's why we've gotta pour into the kids. We gotta support the kids. Where the kids are, we gotta go and we gotta ask them, like, what do you think? What are you doing? How do you feel? How do you dance? How do you sing? How do you rap? How do you write? How do you score? We've gotta go and ask them. We ain't gonna do it, y'all. We're not gonna do it. We're going to enjoy watching it. We're going to enjoy trying to, get along with them, and we're gonna enjoy being there, but we're not gonna do it. But what we are gonna do is we gonna feed these kids.
That's right.
We are going to encourage these kids. We gotta pay these kids. We gotta build spaces and allow spaces for these kids to do these things. Because we're too biased. It's in our DNA, like it's in our, even while we're in here, we don't care what school we go to, but it's back there, we're wandering, but our kids are gonna do it. We gotta feed them.
Is that a good note?
That's a good note.
To have these things end. It's all yeah.
We still got a little bit back there.
Our online watchers asked when is part 2?
Yeah.
Well, let's give one last round of applause to the folks in the center.
Incredible conversation. I truly appreciate the genius that is in this entire room. All of the thoughts. I'm going to drive home and try to actually solve something.
Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids.
I'm gonna figure out how to go talk to my son.
Talk to your kids.
Thank you for this, guys.